Hey, it's James, and welcome back to the Inversiverse, episode 10, where we don't just question reality, we question the questions. We go behind the scenes of the scenes, and beneath the masks we didn't even know we were wearing. Lifting the veil. What you see isn't always what it is, and what you feel might not even be yours. In this episode, we're diving into the shadows, territory often shunned, ridiculed, or dismissed as too dark, too edgy, or just conspiracy. But the truth is, the darkest rooms are usually where the light switch is hidden. We're exploring the intersection of dark psychology, the science of manipulation, coercion, and emotional hijacking. The occult, not satanic by default, but hidden by design, a realm of symbols, secrecy, and reality-shaping rituals. Satanism, not just devil horns and shock value, but a deeper ideological inversion, a mirror world where the self is God, morality is fluid, and freedom is a mask for bondage. And cults, the social ritualization of manipulation, whether led by gurus, influencers, or algorithms. Cults feed on identity and offer the illusion of belonging. And lastly, sexual bonding and biological imprinting, how intimacy is used as initiation, manipulation, or soul-level programming, often without conscious awareness. This isn't just a trip down a rabbit hole, it's a guided tour through the machinery behind the matrix. We're not here to fear the dark, we're here to map it, to name it, to expose it, not as an enemy, but as an ecosystem that thrives on our blindness. This episode is not for the faint-hearted, but it is for the clear-of-minded, for the curious, for the ones who've sensed that something's off but couldn't quite name it, until now, so let's begin. Let's invert the verse. Section 1. Dark Psychology, the Science of Manipulation. Not all control is visible. Some of it wears a smile, some of it calls itself love. But what is dark psychology? It's not witchcraft or woo, it's not just what serial killers do in Netflix documentaries, it's a study of how people use psychological tactics to deceive, exploit, coerce, and control. And it's happening all around you in relationships, advertising, politics, religion, education, even social media. The dark triad, the blueprint of manipulators. At the core of dark psychology is what researchers call the dark triad. 3 personality traits that fuel manipulative behaviour. These are narcissism, inflated self-importance, entitlement, need for admiration, Machiavellianism, which is strategic manipulation, emotional detachment, and cunning deception. Lastly, psychopathy, lack of empathy, impulsivity, thrill-seeking, and cruelty without guilt. Individually they are dangerous. Combined, they create a person who can destroy a psyche while making you say thank you. These individuals are not always overt. They often seem charming, intelligent, even spiritually aligned, but beneath the charisma lies a calculated control mechanism. My personal experience with the dark triad, with individuals exhibiting dark triad traits, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, has shown them to be incredibly impulsive, entitled, and invasive. Even after you've made efforts to create distance, they often reappear without warning, sometimes stalking or monitoring you online, tracking your movements through social media. Research supports this kind of obsessive persistence. Individuals in high narcissistic traits are known to violate boundaries and maintain a sense of ownership over others even after rejection. Miller et al. 2017. You can clearly express that you don't want to see them again, offering logical and heartfelt reasons, perhaps that their energy feels wrong, that you don't feel safe, or that their actions consistently contradict their words. Despite this, they'll often re-enter your life with no explanation, sometimes giving you space temporarily, only to suddenly return, leaving you emotionally disorientated. This aligns with what is known as intermittent reinforcement. It's a tactic often observed in narcissistic abuse dynamics, which keeps the victim in a cycle of hope and confusion. Cairns, 2015. Even when you explain your feelings in the simplest, most compassionate terms, they dismiss your needs and disregard your autonomy. They seem unable or unwilling to acknowledge your desire for stability and peace, fixated instead on regaining control. Studies of psychopathy and narcissistic personality disorder often highlight a pronounced lack of empathy and sense of entitlement that underpins behaviours. Falhouse and Williams, 2002. When you tell them you feel emotionally overwhelmed by their presence, they may stare at you blankly, expressionless, disconnected. This vacant look, often described by survivors of emotional abuse, is sometimes referred to as the reptilian stare or dead eyes, and is noted by clinicians as a potential sign of emotional detachment or manipulative intent in high-conflict personalities. Blacknin, 2005. This lack of emotional reciprocity can trigger panic and confusion as your brain struggles to understand why your emotional honesty is being met with apathy or silence. In such moments you may begin to question your reality. Their refusal to leave your space, even in your own home, can feel like a violation, and when you bring it up to others, the lack of support can deepen your sense of isolation. Victims of narcissistic or psychopathic abuse often report that others fail to see the manipulative behaviour, further complicating their trauma. Freud, 1996, Betrayal Trauma Theory. These individuals often feel entitled to your time, space, and energy simply because you were once open to them. When you withdraw that access, they may resort to guilt-tripping, blaming you for being distant or irrational. They may smear your character to others, painting themselves as the victim and you as unstable. This is classic tactic known as DARVO, deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender, frequently observed in emotional manipulators. Freud, 1997. Even after putting you through cycles of emotional agony, rejection, projection, and subtle sabotage, they still expect to have a place in your life. They may have spoken ill of you to others behind your back, while charming those same people with an air of innocence. This form of impression management is well documented in studies on Machiavellianism. Christie and Gaze, 1970. Their charisma and charm often mask their manipulation. They elicit emotional responses by tapping into your subconscious vulnerabilities. They provoke with passive-aggressive remarks, backhanded compliments and veiled insults. Conflict seems to energize them. Gaslighting, making you question your perception of reality, and pathological lying are standard tactics. Even when confronted with with clear evidence of their dishonesty, they deflect. You misunderstood me, or you're the only person who doesn't trust me. Such behaviour is consistent with narcissistic injury and the compulsion to preserve a false image. Kernberg, 1975. As confusion builds, you might find yourself unable to distinguish truth from manipulation. This psychological fog is a hallmark of emotional abuse. In biblical or archetypal terms, it's often said the devil creates confusion, and in psychological terms, confusion is a tool of control. They will say anything to manipulate your perception, often contradicting themselves in the process. You can read their body language, crossed arms, closed posture, defensive stance. These non-verbal cues often veil their words, signalling emotional dishonesty. They may offer apologies, but there is no genuine remorse, only desperation to regain influence over how you see them. They use subtle linguistic cues, flattery and love-bombing, telling you you're the best they've ever had, especially sexually, to play on your vanity and emotional needs. These tactics are widely documented in abusive relationships and narcissistic cycles. Steins, 2011. They draw you in by appealing to your empathy, claiming no one else will help them, only to follow with a carefully timed insult or reminded you of a wound you tried to heal. They talk at you, not with you, monologuing for extended periods without acknowledging your presence. They centre conversations around themselves, using I and my excessively, and rarely ask about you. This self-centered dialogue is not just rude, it reflects a deep lack of self-awareness and empathy, common in those high in narcissism and psychopathy. They emotionally dump their problems onto you, expecting you to lift them, draining your energy while offering nothing in return. The experience can leave you feeling invisible, unheard, and emotionally depleted. So let's look deeper at the dark triad. Number 1, narcissism. The illusion of grandeur. Core traits: grandiosity, entitlement, hypersensitivity to criticism, manipulative attention-seeking, lack of empathy. Subtype: malignant narcissism. Includes sadism, paranoia, and antisocial behaviour. Here's some real-world examples. Elizabeth Holmes, the Theranos business, founded a multi-billion-dollar biotech company on fraudulent technology, cultivated a carefully curated public image, would wear black turtleneck, deep voice, and revolutionary charisma similar to that of Steve Jobs, positioned herself as a saviour of healthcare while putting lives at risk with false diagnostic results. This is classic narcissistic traits: delusional self-belief, lack of empathy for victims, blaming others when exposed. And then there's Anna Sorkin, also known as Anna Delvey, a con artist who posed as a German heiress and infiltrated New York's elite. She used confidence tricks, fashion, and fabricated identity to gain status and money. The narcissistic traits: grandiosity, chronic lying, no remorse for defrauding friends and institutions. Study reference: Paul Hoos and Williams, 2002, introduced a dark triad framework and found that narcissists are often superficially charming and can climb social ladders despite being toxic in relationships and workplaces. Number 2, Machiavellianism, the master manipulator. Core traits are: they are cunning, emotional detachment, strategic deceit, and perpetrators of the long game manipulation. Named after Niccolò Machiavelli, who advocated for manipulation as a legitimate form of leadership. Real-known examples of Machiavellian manipulators: Frank Abagnale Jr., who's brought to fame through Catch Me If You Can, the movie which starred Leonardo DiCaprio. He was a master of deception, faked roles as a pilot, a doctor, and a lawyer before reforming. He used charm and perceived authority to manipulate institutions. High Machiavellian traits: highly intelligent, calculated dishonesty, and impersonation. Then we have Bernie Madoff, the Ponzi scheme architect, who defrauded investors of over $60 billion, including friends, charities, and pensioners. Maintained an image of credibility and success to fuel continued trust. Showed calculated detachment when the scheme collapsed, illustrating core Machiavellian traits. Study reference: Mac-IV scale, developed by Christie and Guys, 1970, measures how likely someone is to manipulate others with no regard for morality, values, or emotional consequences. Number 3, psychopathy, the predator without a conscience. Core traits: they are callous, they have superficial charm, thrill-seeking tendencies, demonstrate lack of remorse, and highly manipulative with manipulation. Psychopaths are typically cold, calculated, and difficult to detect. Many are high-functioning and socially embedded. Real-world examples include Ted Bundy, who was charismatic, intelligent, and outwardly friendly. He used these traits to lure his victims. Exhibited profound emotional detachment, deception, and sadistic pleasure. Even during the trial, he manipulated the courtroom with poise and self-representation. Corporate psychopaths such as Kenneth Lay of Enron engaged in a massive financial deception, leading to one of the largest collapses in US corporate history. He manipulated data, employees, and regulators while maintaining a likable public image. He left thousands financially devastated without a meaningful apology or any demonstration of remorse. Study reference: Robert Hare's PCLR, Psychopathy Checklist Revised, reveals how high-functioning psychopaths are often skilled liars, remorseless, and effective at manipulating large systems, particularly in corporate and political environments. When the triad combines of all 3 traits, you get a weaponized personality. When narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy converge in a single person, you're not dealing with someone who's just difficult or toxic. You're dealing with someone who has become a conscious manipulator, highly skilled at using charm, strategy, and detachment to get what they want, at any cost. These individuals don't seek connection, they seek control, and they build illusions around trust to disguise the abstraction. The scenario, the charmer, the strategist, and the predator all in one. Imagine someone steps into your world, magnetic, bold, and a little dangerous in a way that feels intriguing. They are smooth, they are articulate and emotionally intelligent, but there's an edge to them. They might say things like, "There's something about you, I can't quite explain it. You just feel different." You are then being separated from the crowd. This is where isolation begins through flattery. I've never connected with anyone like this before. Creates false intimacy and a sense of rare significance. Most people are too basic to get me, but you're not like that, which fuels superiority and creates an us-vs-them alliance. At first it feels empowering, maybe even prophetic, but over time their influence starts to reshape your sense of what's right, acceptable, or possible. And then one day, maybe casually, they express a fascination with control, with sensual power, with roles that combine seduction and domination. In one real-life case, someone once told me that they liked the idea of becoming a madam. After the individual had disclosed to me previously that they were once a sexual escort, during a period of their life. It wasn't directed at me or suggested as my path, and I did not judge, but the statement stood out. It revealed something deeper, a mindset oriented around control, commodification, and the strategic use of sexuality as currency. This type of disclosure isn't always accidental. It can be a psychological signal, testing if you share their worldview, an attempt to normalize inversion, flipping shame into power and empathy into leverage, a way to draw others into their framework of control, not through orders, but through intrigue. These individuals often thrive in cults, as leaders, such as Charles Manson pictured on the left, within corporations as CEOs or executives, within relationships as narcissistic abusers, media such as influencers, gurus, politicians, or even religious leaders such as the Pope on the right. They don't break rules, they bend perception. They don't take control, they let you hand it over willingly. Inverse insight. These traits are not just red flags in people, they are reflections of deeper cultural patterns. A society that rewards narcissism, self-branding, often also projected and known as individualism. Systems that normalise manipulation, such as marketing and PR. Structures that are inherently psychopathic, corporate capitalism, and shadow government operations. Dark psychology isn't an outlier, it's the operating system of projected beliefs and behaviours. Through our senses, which imprint our genetic code, the body and brain are programmable through subconscious emotional manipulation, so it's always important to be discerning on who you allow into your life. How to recognise the seduction of a dark personality. 1. They reflect you too perfectly. They seem exactly like you. They like what you like, hate what you hate, believe what you believe. It feels fated, but it may just be mirroring, a common tactic to build rapport. Ask yourself, is this real resonance or performance-based alignment? 2. Your values begin to shift, subtly. You start excusing things you wouldn't tolerate from others. They challenge your ethics or beliefs in a way that makes you feel enlightened, rebellious, or even evolved. Ask yourself, am I growing, or being groomed to tolerate their world? 3. There's a fast track to intensity. The connection escalates quickly, emotionally, sexually, spiritually, or professionally. They use phrases like, I never felt like this before, or we're meant to do something big together, or they'll tell you that they love you within days. This is love bombing or trauma bonding in disguise. Ask yourself, is this deep, or just deep feeling? You feel that you're more confused than clear within. They're amazing one day, dismissive the next. Praise and punishment creates a push and pull cycle. You start doubting yourself, second-guessing your instincts, justifying their contradictions. Ask yourself, why do I feel more addicted than aligned? 5. You're not thinking clearly, you're feeling compelled. You feel a magnetic pull, but not from a grounded place. It's obsessive, overwhelming, and addictive. This may be hormonal. Oxytocin, dopamine surges, manipulated by attention, touch, or mystery. Ask yourself, am I choosing this consciously, or am I under influence, being coerced? 6. They speak in absolutes, allure, or ambiguity. People just don't get me. You're different, you see what others don't. Trust me, I'll take care of everything. Seduction often hides in language, vague promises, spiritual overtones, and emotional appeal. Ask yourself, are they empowering my sovereignty, or are they rewriting it? Key signs you're being seduced by the triad. Let's look at them now. Trait, you feel, and because they are. Trait, narcissistic, flattered and elevated, you'll feel. Because they are feeding off your admiration. Machiavellian, you feel enticed and intrigued. That's because they are strategically manipulating your perception. Trait, psychopathic, addicted and unstable, you might feel, because they are playing with your emotion like levers. How to start breaking the spell. 1. Pause the fantasy. Slow down the connection. Ask real, grounded questions. Journal your baseline. Who were you before they entered your world? Watch their patterns, not their words. 3. Are their patterns consistent? Do they honour boundaries? 4. Talk to someone outside the dynamic. Fresh perspectives break illusions. 5. Reclaim your centre. Seduction works best when you're disconnected from your intuition. An Inversiverse insight. Seducers don't steal your power, you give it to them, under the spell of perception. But when you learn to spot the spell mid-cast, you begin to invert the trance. You move from, they make me feel amazing, to, why do I need them to feel amazing? These individuals are energy alchemists. They transmute energy in real time, before your very eyes. But you are not defenseless to transmuting your own energy and experiences. If you are in a bad situation, you can think, ponder solutions, and transmute that negative energy into a positive, such as this presentation. I found myself alone after a tough ending to a recent friendship, but I'm taking this opportunity and experience to produce this piece of work, the output being that it will hopefully be of benefit to others. This is real-time alchemy. The act of alchemy isn't literally turning copper into gold, it's turning negativity into positivity. Positivity that spreads, uplifts, and truly empowers. Don't let the tricksters keep you in a place of weakness, negativity, or worthlessness. You always have the potential to change, and it begins simply when you decide to. That's where sovereignty begins. That's when you stop being a character in their script and start authoring your own. Section 2. The Occult. Hidden knowledge, misunderstood power. To control perception, you don't need to lie, you just need to hide the truth in plain sight. The occult is not necessarily evil, it simply means hidden. But in a world where power often comes from what remains unseen, the occult becomes a strategic tool. Those who understand the symbols, the rituals, the energy flows, and the layered meanings can influence those who do not, without ever needing to lift a finger. Pictured a well-known occultist, Marina Abramovich, who openly performs spirit cooking rituals in plain sight. She is summoning evil spirits, and people think that it's a joke. She is harnessing evil, she is harnessing and celebrating pain, the devil in plain sight. Definitions and origins. The occult equals hidden from common view or consciousness. Historically linked to astrology, alchemy, divination, mysticism, sacred geometry, and ancient spiritual practices. Hidden knowledge, once protected, now gate-kept. Symbolism as language. 1. Symbols act as psychological triggers, bypassing logic and speaking directly to the unconscious mind. 2. Common occult symbols include the Eye of Providence, the All-Seeing Eye, Surveillance, Omniscience. B. Pentagram, balance of elements or inversion of nature, depending on orientation. The Serpent, C. Duality of wisdom and deception. D. Saturn symbolism, time, karma, restriction, authority. These symbols are embedded in the media, fashion, architecture, corporate branding, and even children's programming, often unnoticed by the uninitiated. Pictured, the Starbucks logo, the siren whose allure drew in the sailors. If their coffee is so good, why would you need to be allured? We have previously discussed within the Dark Triad, charm and allure is a tool of dark psychology. In another example of symbolism, the World Health Organization openly depict the serpent within their logo. Above we discussed, the serpent is duality of wisdom and deception. These criminals are so deceptive, they have tricked billions into taking a medical intervention, the Pfizer jab, that will see millions die. They do not hide it. It's there for all to see. The serpent sits within the middle of the logo. Can you not see it? Magic, ritual, and reality. Magic, spelt with a K, is defined by Aleister Crowley as the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. It is not a fantasy, but a deliberate use of intention, focus, and ritual to influence physical, emotional, or psychological outcomes. Rituals serve as psychic software. Repeated gestures, symbols, words, and mental states are used to program consciousness. Example, the Catholic Mass, a structured ritual involving chants, incense, symbolic sacrifice, and communion that mirrors ancient occult forms. Another example, corporate product launches such as Apple's products, scripted events with symbolic lighting, incantation-style speeches, and emotional pacing. Occult rituals can range from solitary practices like sigil magic to orchestrated mass rituals like mystery schools or fraternal orders, well known in American sororities and fraternities. Crowley's philomatic rituals, Masonic initiations, and even events like the Bohemian Grove cremation or of care ceremony are known public examples. Secrecy and hierarchies. The occult is structured like a pyramid. We have exoteric layer, what the masses see, for example, popular astrology, surface level symbolism. Then we have esoteric layer, reserved for initiates, where deeper meaning, historical context, and energetic principles are revealed. Initiatory systems. Knowledge is revealed gradually, only after passing tests or rituals of passage. Example of layered systems. Freemasonry. Members ascend through degrees, each revealing new symbols, oaths, and cosmological views. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Practitioners move through elemental stages of initiation linked to personal transformation and mystical access. These systems often mirror control structures. Top-down secrecy creates dependency and reverence for those above. The further up you go, the more you are asked to protect the secrecy of the system. Known occasions. Bohemian Grove, United States of America. Annual elite gatherings involving symbolic cremation rituals to symbolize detachment from empathy or moral restraint. An example in Eyes Wide Shut style mask ceremonies, fictionalized in the movie, but based on real rumors of elite occult gatherings involving ritual theater, sex magic, and symbolic sacrifice. These rituals often serve dual purposes. 1. Programming the participant, altering perception, loyalty, and identity. 2. Projecting power. Those who know the code control those who don't. Inversiverse insight. The occult is not the enemy. Ignorance of it is. When you don't understand the systems, you risk becoming a pawn in someone else's ritual. The world is full of rituals we mistake for culture, marketing, or entertainment. What you don't understand can still program you. What you mock might be what holds the key. The true occultist isn't the one who controls others, it's the one who reclaims their unconscious from cultural conditioning. Let's now move to section 3, Satanism, rebellion or reinforcement. To understand Satanism, you must separate the theatre from the theology. Satanism, like the occult, is often misunderstood. To some, it is the ultimate rebellion. To others, it's a structured inversion of morality. But at its core, Satanism is less about red horns and sacrifices and more about philosophy, identity, and power. Many faces of Satanism. Theistic Satanism is the belief in and worship of Satan as an actual entity, sometimes associated with traditional Christian depictions, other times more nuanced or Gnostic. LaVeyan Satanism, created by Anton LaVey in the 60s, says it's atheistic, symbolic, and rooted in individualism, egoism, and carnal realism. Satan is a metaphor for rebellion and human instinct. Luciferianism focuses on Lucifer as a bringer of light, knowledge, and personal sovereignty, often overlaps with occult teachings and Gnostic philosophy. These forms may differ in practice, but they share common threads: rejection of dogmatic religion, emphasis on self-deification, inversion of reinterpretation of traditional spiritual frameworks. So what is the philosophy of inversion? In satanic thought, moral structures are flipped. Humanity becomes weakness, obedience becomes naivety, pleasure and indulgence become sacred. This isn't random rebellion, it's strategic conversion. By rejecting imposed norms, the practitioner becomes their authority. The goal is liberation from guilt, shame, and collective programming. But liberation can become an illusion. When ego is enthroned, discernment fades into self-worship. Do what thou wilt shalt be whole of law, a quote by Aleister Crowley, is often misunderstood as freedom without consequence, but deeper analysis reveals the need for true will over impulsive desire. Satanism in culture. The image of Satanism has been commodified. Music videos, fashion, film, sports, and even political performances borrow from satanic imagery for shock value. Pentagrams, Baphomet, inverted crosses all play into the theatre of rebellion. While some is pure performance, certain cultural institutions subtly promote satanic principles. Hyper-individualism, moral relativism, ego worship, and carnal glorification. Not all Satanists are in power, but the ideology of inversion thrives in systems that reward manipulation, spectacle, and hierarchy. Pictured a demon holding a needle at the 2012 London Olympics. Why? Here's another of their plain sight efforts. Rituals, orders, and elite symbolism. Some fringe accounts and whistleblowers' claims describe elite satanic orders involved in ritual abuse, human trafficking, or psychological programming. While many claims remain unproven or exaggerated, unproven I ask, symbolism linked to Baphomet, inverted pentagrams, and Satanarian black cube cults appear across finance, architecture, and pop culture. The pictures of the headlines. These are not exaggerated claims. The latest story from ABC was published 54 minutes before I created this. Examples of headlines include: Police rescue 33 West Africans from human trafficking scam in Ivory Coast. Global raids rescue 3,200 potential victims of trafficking and identify 17,800 irregular migrants. These are not exaggerated claims. Events like the Gotthard Tunnel Ceremony 2016 raise eyebrows for open displays of occult and infernal themes. Whether these themes are symbolic performances or revelations of deeper affiliation remains debatable. Inversiverse insight. Satanism offers a mirror. It reveals what you worship: conformity, ego, desire, or sovereignty. It asks, who gets to define good and evil? What happens when freedom becomes entitlement? And when everyone becomes their god? What governs the collective? The real danger isn't the symbol, it's the idea that nothing is sacred except the self. Section 3.1. Cultism and cults, the hive of the mind. A cult doesn't begin with control, it begins with comfort. Cults aren't just extreme outliers with remote compounds and brainwashed devotees. They exist in many forms: spiritual movements, corporate cultures, self-help communities, fandoms, and even social media groups. So what defines a cult is not the belief, it's the structure of control. Psychological mechanics of cults. Identity fusion. The individual sense of self becomes merged with the group, leader, or mission. Love bombing. Excessive praise, affection, and belonging in the beginning to hook new members. Thought-stopping language. Catchphrases or mantras designed to shut down critical thinking. For example, don't question the mission. That's just your ego. You're not ready for this truth. Us vs them. Cults thrive on division and external threats. Members are told that outsiders are dangerous, unenlightened, or deceived, such as the UK government calling people conspiracy theorists for critically thinking and expressing their thoughts, beliefs, and opinions against the measures they introduced through the COVID lockdowns. Fear-based control. Leaving the group is associated with spiritual death, emotional ruin, or eternal punishment. Case studies. Real-world cult dynamics. Jonestown, People's Temple, led by Jim Jones, combined utopian promises with increasing control, paranoia, and eventual mass death. Heaven's Gate cult, a blend of UFO theology and apocalyptic beliefs. Members were isolated, renamed, and ritualistically surrendered personal identities. The NXIVM cult, a self-help and business coaching organisation that use hierarchical control, blackmail, and psychological manipulation to dominate members, especially women. Each of these began with promise and purpose, only to evolve into psychological imprisonment. We now live in the digital world, where even digital cults are forming online. This section is digital cultism, algorithmic indoctrination. Online echo chambers behave like digital cults. Charismatic influencers become de facto gurus. Community platforms reinforce groupthink and identity alignment. Algorithms feed content that reinforces belief and punishes dissent. Cancel cultures, such examples where celebrities become cancelled because of their beliefs, yet for years they were praised. fanatical subreddits, truth communities, and personality-driven YouTube channels can exhibit cult-like dynamics. Parasocial relationships blur the line between idealization and loyalty. Occultism and cult structure. Many occult schools, e.g. Ordo Templi Orientis, certain branches of Femala or Hermeticism, employ initiation rites and secrecy, which can drift into cultic dynamics. When power becomes centralized and questioning becomes forbidden, ritual transforms into indoctrination. Sexual control is often present in cult structures where intimacy is politicized, weaponized, or ritualized. Inversiverse insight. Not all cults wear robes. Some wear suits. Some hold microphones. Some have blue check marks. The question isn't, am I in a cult? It's, am I in a space where my critical thinking is being eroded in exchange for belonging, identity, or salvation? When the group replaces your inner voice, you're not part of a movement, you're part of a machine. Such example, PayPal blocks expression, prevents users from transactions on their service if they don't agree with their beliefs. But what if the entire world is starting to operate like a cult, I ask? From global institutions to ideological tribes, from algorithm-fed realities to curated identities, we now live in a mass-scale simulation of belonging, obedience, and emotional dependence. Governments, corporations, social movements, and even health narratives have coalesced into a web of indoctrination disguised as freedom. The new cult doesn't need a compound, it lives in your phone. It uses repetition, fear, and shame to shape what you think is true. Notice how every institution has its own logo. How to break the spell. Escaping from cultic influence. Rebuild independent thinking. Ask yourself, what do I believe outside this group's lens? Engage with opposing views without fear or defensiveness. Reconnect with embodiment. Cultic influence often pulls you into your head, ideas, ideologies, dogma. Grounding practices like breathwork, journaling, and nature can reconnect intuition and discernment. Seek unfiltered input, read old books, listen to unedited conversations, and exit the algorithm. Break the feedback loop that keeps you in agreement with your bubble. Track your identity hooks. What part of you is addicted to the validation, safety, or identity group the group provides? Can you be yourself without their approval? Create new inner authority. Cults replace your internal compass. Rebuilding it is the ultimate liberation. Self-trust is the antidote to groupthink. Escaping a cult isn't about running away. It's about remembering who you were before you forgot yourself. Before we transition into section 2, it's important to understand that cults don't just control beliefs, they often control bodies and encourage the control of other bodies. Once identity is rewired through ideology and isolation, the next frontier becomes intimacy. In many cultic environments, whether spiritual, corporate, or political, sexual access is used to reinforce power dynamics. The mainstream media are currently being seen to promote promiscuity. This is cultesque behaviour, encouraging young women to be open with their bodies, that high body counts are irrelevant. They are promoting and praising influencers such as porn star Bonnie Blue for her empowerment, whose most recent claim to fame is sleeping with 1,000 men. This is not empowering, it is encouraging debauchery, it is in defiance of chastity, it is intentional, because when individuals mate and connect on superficial grounds, it leads to trauma, it leads to others being traumatized, and the potential for deep shame and regret later in life. The chemical bonds, the pair bonding remains, and it's carried through DNA. It is a means for them to externally break down cohesive bonds, relationships, and challenges, love and loyalty between us. The leader becomes a deity, such as the example of Bonnie Blue. Followers become extensions of will, and in this structure, sex is rarely just sex. It is used to bind loyalty, test obedience, and dissolve individuals' boundaries. This isn't exclusive to fringe movements. It echoes through influencer culture, dating dynamics, hookup culture, and spiritual communities. The word itself, structured increasingly like a giant cult, reward the same behaviors, emotional dominance, strategic seduction, and a weaponization of connection. The question isn't just, who do I trust? It becomes, who am I chemically, emotionally, and psychologically fusing with, and why? This leads us into the next chapter, how sex becomes a ritual of imprinting, control, and transformation. 3.2. Sex, power, and biological imprinting, the hidden cost of connection. Intimacy is not always sacred. Sometimes it's strategy. We're taught to see sex as private, personal act of love, pleasure, or connection. But in darker contexts and minds, it becomes a tool for bonding, control, and transformation. Sex is not always just about affection. It can also be about influence, hierarchy, and imprinting. Sex as manipulation and bonding. In toxic relationships, sex is used to fast-track emotional attachment before trust is truly earned. Love bombing often leads quickly into sexual intimacy, creating oxytocin-fueled attachment to a person you don't even truly know yet. Sex becomes a currency, used to manipulate, control, reward, or punish. In narcissistic dynamics, sex can be used to simulate a deep connection while maintaining emotional distance. I love you becomes bait, not a bond. A personal reflection on manipulation, sex, and self-respect. From personal experience, I've come to understand just how potent sexual energy can be when it is used, not for connection, but for control. There was someone I had a strong connection with in the past. Over time, I began to notice subtle patterns. They would shower me with affection early on, classic love bombing, and use sexual intimacy to try and shape the emotional tone of the relationship. Like any two people navigating life together, we experience the natural ups and downs, daily stress, clashing values, and external pressures. Arguments would arise frequently. often over small things that escalated into larger emotional storms. When tensions became too high, I would step back, not out of dismissal, but out of conscious effort to maintain emotional equilibrium. I don't avoid communication, but after a point, talking becomes circular when the other person can't simply agree to disagree. When one individual is determined to be right at all costs or remains entrenched in ego, the relationship becomes less about connection and more about control. What I began to notice, consistently, was that after these periods of conflict, the same cycle would repeat. They would approach me sexually, using intimacy as a way to disarm, redirect, or patch over the deeper emotional discord. It wasn't just spontaneous passion. It became clear that this was strategic. They would dress in ways they knew I would once found attractive, wearing outfits I had previously complimented. These weren't neutral moments, they were attempts to re-establish power in the dynamic through sexual seduction, and I began to find it amusing. I didn't find it amusing in a dismissive way, but in the sense that the pattern becomes so obvious, it lost its power. I could not unsee what I was seeing. I'm not a fool, and I felt I was being made a fool of. I wasn't seduced, I was consciously observing. I'm not someone who is easily manipulated through physical temptation, and I saw these efforts as tactics of control, immaturity, and not gestures of love. The bond was broken, and I had no interest in continuing to build something that no longer felt rooted in mutual respect. I started to reject their advances, not to control them, but because I had no desire to engage with an illusion. If I did, I knew the dynamic would remain unchanged. They didn't value me, they didn't respect me. They would oscillate hot and cold, then project the dysfunction onto me. But I knew my centre. I've worked hard to maintain a baseline of conscious engagement in every relationship I step into. My philosophy is simple. If you respect me, I'll respect you. And unfortunately, not everyone can match that. To engage in that cycle would have only fed a toxic dynamic, not healed it. Over time, I've come to understand the emotional cost of casual sexual encounters. I've made mistakes, especially during moments in my life where I was less grounded, less self-sourced. I've sought love externally when I needed to first cultivate it internally, and I paid the price through emotional pain, confusion, and misaligned bonds. But I've also grown, through the experience, through reflection, through mistakes. Now, I prefer to build authentic connection, a bond that isn't just rooted in lust or physical chemistry, but in mutual respect, emotional maturity, and spiritual resonance. Biological imprinting, hormonal and genetic residue. Oxytocin and vasopressin are neurochemicals released during orgasm and touch, causing emotional bonding and memory encoding. Trauma bonding, when intermittent affection and stress cause chemical addiction to a person, even when they're abusive. Microchimerism. Scientific studies, e.g. Chan et al. 2012, have shown that male DNA has been found in women's brains and bodies long after sexual contact or pregnancy. This raises questions about biological imprinting, where aspects of a partner remain within a person, physically or genetically. Seminal signaling. Seminal fluid contains hormones, proteins, and immunological agents that can influence a woman's reproductive and immune system. Research led by Sarah Robertson and others show that these components affect gene expression, tolerance, and fertility response. The biological residue of sex may go deeper than emotion. It may be embedded in biology itself. Sex as initiation and occult tool. In occult and cultic systems, sex is often ritualized, used as a form of spiritual binding, initiation, or symbolic sacrifice, seen in groups like Otto, Aleister Crowley's Femla, and widespread in elite circles. Sex magic uses orgasmic energy to project intention or channel entities, merges the physical act with ritual consciousness. When done with informed consent, it's a form of spiritual practice. When done manipulatively, it becomes psychological programming. Coercive sexual bonding. Some manipulative individuals use sex to gain psychological leverages over partners. Sex becomes a method of fraudulent bonding where trust is simulated to gain control, and that's how I felt within my personal relationship previously highlighted. Inversiverse insight. We rarely ask, who am I becoming through who I bond with? If sex leaves behind not just memories, but chemical, emotional, and possibly genetic imprints, then intimacy must be entered with discernment, not desire alone. When someone enters your body, they may also enter your narrative, your chemistry, and your identity. Sex can be sacred, but when it's weaponized, it becomes initiation into a role, a script, or a system, often without your consent. Section 4. Intersections, control, initiation, and indoctrination. Everything is connected, but not everything is conscious. By this point in the episode, we've traversed through individual manipulation, esoteric systems, philosophical inversions, cult psychology, and the weaponization of sex. What becomes clear is that these aren't isolated themes, they are interlinked technologies of control. This section explores how they converge into a unified architecture, a ritualistic system of indoctrination, where trauma, seduction, belief, and secrecy coalesce to rewrite identity as its roots. Initiation versus indoctrination. Initiation is meant to awaken, a symbolic death and rebirth towards higher knowledge and self-realization. An example of initiation is baptism, which is an initiation into a religious following, pictured. Indoctrination, however, is submission disguised as awakening, a controlled script where you believe you're becoming free, but your choices were pre-written. In many systems, especially cults or hierarchical spiritual structures, initiation is ritualized indoctrination. You earn your place by surrendering identity, critical thought, and personal boundaries. Emotional trauma is used to create disorientation, followed by reprogramming through new language, doctrine, and behavioral norms. Break someone down, then tell them who they are. This is the ritual of indoctrination. Indoctrination can be achieved through psychological layering. First comes manipulation, which is the emotional bait, the seduction, and the validation. Then symbolism, repetition, rituals, dress, and language. Then trauma, emotional breakage, shaming, isolation. Then reformation, new identity, new truth, group assimilation. This mirrors both occult initiations and dark psychology tactics, and it's happening globally. Schools that crush creativity before rebuilding obedience, political movements that mirror cult dynamics, brands, apps, and ideologies that subtly rewrite identity. Psychological layering was visible during the COVID-19 pandemic, where the world itself began to mirror the structure of a global cult. In my view, organisations such as the World Economic Forum exhibited classic cult behaviours, hierarchical control, belief indoctrination, and emotional manipulation disguised as policy. The European Union, along with various entrenched factions in many countries, appeared to support and replicate this pattern. During the pandemic, fear was weaponised to enforce conformity. Political polarisation intensified between the left and the right, framed as good versus evil, rather than debate versus disagreement. Dissent was actively suppressed. Logical and critical thinkers were dismissed as conspiracy theorists. Censorship flourished across all major online platforms, and voices questioning the narrative were silenced. An example of thought-stopping techniques and groupthink conditioning, as seen in cult psychology, Lifton, 1989. Language was the key tool of manipulation. Protect the NHS to save lives. Eat out to help out. The new normal. Build back better, and a great reset. These are linguistic anchors, phrases repeated across media and political speeches, designed to establish new behavioural norms through neurolinguistic priming. Repeated exposure leads to unconscious compliance, a technique explored in language framing theory, Lakoff, 2004. As society was distracted by these slogans, deeper structural changes occurred, under the guise of safety. Emergency powers, legislative adjustments, and violations of international human rights occurred, including the Nuremberg Code. Long-standing protections were bypassed in the name of public health, a classic case of inversion, destroying freedom in the name of security. Schools became indoctrination hubs, where parental oversight diminished. This mirrors the cultic tactic of isolating members from outside influence, particularly parental or generational guidance, as documented in Cult Dynamics Research, Hassan, 2015. The public was trained to speak in divisive terms, such as, you're vaccinated or you're unvaxxed, trust the science versus you're a denier, you're crazy, you're a conspiracy theorist, trust the science. This is identity reformation through social pressure, reinforcing us vs them conditioning, further breaking down individual discernment and unity. Corporate enforcement began overlapping with state control. Companies like PayPal took ideological stances, banning users based on perceived political leanings. This is corporate authoritarianism, where businesses become arbiters of the truth without democratic accountability. All of this was amplified by branding, symbolism, and customer loyalty schemes, although they were there before. Emotional conditioning over decades. Such examples include that a free coffee for every 5 may seem benign, but it reflects a deeper pattern of behavioural conditioning through reward systems, similar to operant conditioning, B.F. Skinner, 1938. It's no joke that may have been the most expensive coffee of your life. You paid with your sovereignty. In hindsight, many were empowered by the very systems that now govern them through fear, dependency, and carefully constructed sense of loyalty. This is psychological layering at scale, manipulation, ritual, trauma, and reformation, not within a building or compound, but across the entire world. The new temples, culture, algorithms, and influence. Influencers as modern priests, feeding audiences ritualized content and identity scripts. Social media as a global initiation chamber, triggering comparison, conformity, emotional highs and lows. Cultural movements that blur the lines between liberation and indoctrination. Example, spiritual bypassing, identity politics, and hypercapitalist self-care. All of it mimics cult behavior, but scaled across civilization. Inversiverse insight. The deeper pattern behind the dark arts isn't just power, it's engineering belief. To control someone's reality, you don't have to imprison them. You just have to write their story before they do. Every system that breaks you then offers itself as the answer. Problem, reaction, solution. Is participating in a form of modern initiation, but unless you are conscious of the script, you are not being awakened, you are being absorbed. The difference between ritual and manipulation is consent. The difference between initiation and indoctrination is sovereignty. Section 5. The real versus the theatre. Not all that is dark is real, not all that is light is true. In a world saturated with symbolism, spectacle, and performance, it's increasingly difficult to discern what's authentic from what is orchestrated. This section examines the blurred lines between authentic power structures and theatrical control mechanisms, and how much of what we consider rebellion, awakening, or opposition might be staged. Performance vs power. Much of modern spirituality, rebellion, and resistance is aesthetic, not structural. Symbolism is co-opted, counterculture is monetized. The very systems that claim to liberate us may be manufactured by the same forces they pretend to oppose. Examples. The entertainment industry uses occult symbols and satanic imagery, not to enlighten, but to shock, desensitize, or parody belief systems, as we recently saw through the Olympics in France. Political figures are cast as outsiders or revolutionaries. For example, Biden was praised, Trump was blamed, while still enacting corporate or globalist agendas. Spiritual influencers commodifying enlightenment, selling transcendence in 10 steps or less are other examples. Controlled opposition and false awakening. Many voices claiming to speak the truth are playing a role in a larger narrative designed to redirect dissent. Controlled opposition means funding, platforming, or promoting voices that look like resistance, but ultimately uphold the same system. Think of it as a second net. If you escape the first illusion, you're caught in the second, a more subtle one. You thought you escaped the maze, however you just entered a better decorated corridor. Pop culture vs. true practice. Occult symbols, satanic imagery, and spiritual archetypes are widespread in pop culture, but often divorced from their meaning, research claimed. This creates desensitization and detachment. Symbols are stripped of potency and reduced to memes or fashion. Meanwhile, real practices, those involving energy work, inner transformation, or moral alignment, are buried beneath the spectacle. Pictured Snoop Dogg wearing a Baphomet chain, and Alice in Wonderland's Down the Rabbit Hole. Cognitive theatre. Much of society operates like a psycho-emotional theatre. Crisis and solution are often scripted. News cycles mirror narrative arcs. Fear and hope are marketed like genres. The audience is emotionally invested, but the actors follow scripts. Inversiverse insight. The danger isn't in symbols, it's in mistaking performance for principle. Not all who rebel are free. Not all who speak the truth are sovereign. The most dangerous person is the one you cheer for. The final illusion is thinking you're awake while still inside the show. Those I refer to as woke, that's cult terminology. More often than not, these individuals are fast asleep, still embracing the show. Section 6. So how do we see through the illusion? Tools of discernment, seeing through the smoke. Discernment is the sword, awareness is the shield. After walking through the deepest shadows, dark psychology, occult layers, cult dynamics, and inverted sexuality, what remains is the question, how do we see clearly? In a world engineered to deceive, seduce, and control, the ultimate rebellion isn't shouting louder, it's seeing sharper. This section is not about escape, it's about conscious evolution. Symbolic and psychological literacy. Learn to decode recurring archetypes, gestures, and language used in the media, education, and culture. Recognize when words are used to hypnotize rather than inform, e.g., repetition, euphemisms, inversion. Study the structures of cults, initiation systems, and propaganda models. One such tool of which can aid us in improving our symbolic and psychological literacy is to study and understand neuro-linguistic programming. Neuro-linguistic programming is a set of communication strategies developed in the 1970s to influence behaviour through language, thought, and subconscious patterning. Though debated in academic circles, its real-world application is widespread, used in marketing, politics, motivational speaking, and corporate training. Neuro-linguistic programming and language views continued. NLP often relies on subtle linguistic engineering, embedded commands, such as hidden directives within casual phrases. You might start to realise how valuable this information is a directive. Presuppositions, statements that assume your agreement. When you feel ready to join us, we'll show you the way. Implies you will feel ready and that you will join. Anchoring, attaching a word, phrase, or gesture to a specific emotional state. Real-life example of a cue. If you care about your community, you'll get vaccinated. The phrase subtly implies that not complying equates to not caring. It creates a moral binary and emotional pressure, bypassing logic and replacing it with social coercion. When you become attuned to these patterns, you begin to see that many conversations are really scripts designed to direct belief and behaviour. The most powerful spells are the ones hidden in casual speeches. Additional tools for discernment. Emotional intelligence. Improve your emotional intelligence. Pay attention to how content, people, or groups make you feel before they tell you what to think. Trauma bonding often feels like love. Fear-based unity often feels like belonging. If you feel addicted, reactive, or disorientated, pause. These are signals of manipulation. Improve your critical discernment. Challenge narratives, including your own. Seek nuance. Truth rarely screams in absolutes. Avoid false binaries. Ask who benefits when you are made to pick a side. Integration over purity. Don't seek to be perfectly untainted. Seek to be aware. Rejecting the world entirely is its form of programming. The goal is sovereignty, not separatism. Integrate what empowers you. Discard what enslaves you. Closing reflections. The inner occultist. The final ritual is not what they do to you. It's what you choose to do with what you're seen. After journeying through the shadows of manipulation, ritual, identity control, and spiritual inversion, one thing that becomes clear. You are not powerless, you are programmable, and you are the programmer. This episode hasn't been about fear, it's been about naming the unseen, understanding how manipulation works at every level, from sex to symbols, cults to corporations, trauma to transformation. The true power was never out there, it's in your capacity to see, to choose, and to act consciously. The inner occultist. We think often of the occult as something outside of us, a group, a ritual, a mystery held by others. But the deepest occult is your unconscious mind, your dreams, your desires, your fears, your patterns. The real magician isn't the one in robes, it's the one who has faced their shadow, met their inner archetypes, and refused to be defined by external programming. The true esoteric path is not about acquiring more secrets, it's about turning your unconscious into your ally. Integration. What you've seen, you can now own. You've seen how symbols influence perception. Word triggers emotion. Sex rewires identity. Belief shapes behaviour. Trauma creates openings for control. Now what, you may ask? You don't need to fight every system. You don't need to convert others. Maybe you could improve your sight. What that looks like. Recognizing seduction when it shows up in charisma, aesthetics, or ideology. refusing to give away your authority to anyone who promises salvation, healing, or purpose without asking for your discernment, creating relationships based on transparency, not chemistry alone, aligning your sexual energy with intention, not escape, seeing cults not just in groups but in behaviours, media, and emotional dependencies. You are the altar. The final truth of this episode and this path is this: if manipulation is ritual, then awareness is initiation. If you are the one watching the system, if you are the one questioning the script, if you are the one choosing rather than reacting, then you are already the magician, not one who casts spells, but one who breaks them. Finally, we're at the end of this journey. I'm James, this is Inversiverse, and thank you for joining me.